I'm Donna Thatcher. I was in the Philippines, left during 1961, actually started in my town there on New Year's Day of 1962. I was in the group Philippines 2. There was another group just a couple weeks ahead of us. And I was in Cabatuan, Iloilo, which is on the island of Panay. And our town was a collection of bamboo buildings built on stilts and with seasonal floodwater underneath. And people were very, very creative in what they did. They grew rice mainly, was the staple, and everybody raised rice. But there were also papaya trees and banana trees and some other things, and lots of vegetables. People adapted so well to an extremely extended season when there was no food at all. We had a rainy season and a dry season. And the main part of the end of the dry season, which came about which was October and November and on into December, was just called the hungry season because all the rice harvest from the preceding year had been used up except for the seed grain they were storing. And it rained, and during that season chickens don't lay eggs, nothing, and there was very, very little to eat. And everybody just gradually cut their food back. Until at school it was difficult to teach because all the kids had had so little food that everyone spent part of each school day just lying with their heads on their folded arms on their desks because they didn't have energy enough to do other things. But everybody was accustomed to this because there was no way to store food very well. The food that's stored on into that season is badly deteriorated from mold and rodents and all kinds of things. And transportation on the inland areas and small rural areas was so poor that even though there were harvests taking place in other parts of the country, there wasn't food being brought in. And everybody just adapted to this. They also assumed that most people who were going to die during that year would die during the hungry season. Coming back to the States, it was a big surprise to see food being thrown away because no one where we were had any surplus food. If they did, it was fed to the pigs and the goats and the chickens. We fed any leftovers were eaten by the livestock. There was never any waste whatsoever. It was all used. People did amazingly well and had happy communities, had dances and parties and things in spite of this. But one big celebration season was when the harvest started to come in at around Christmas. And so everyone was working all day and late into the night. The children came to school but went right home from school to help harvest rice or to take care of babies while other people harvested rice. And there were special foods that can be made only by cooking freshly harvested rice. So there were all these treats. And the children went right home from school for that. And Christmas season was very festive because of the rice harvest. It was also very exhausting because everybody was working 16 hours a day trying to harvest rice and process it and save it and do things with it. So Christmases were very, very exciting in that way because it was a season of feasting. I was in the Philippines when President Kennedy was assassinated, and I was actually away from our town. I was in Iloilo City doing errands, and had missed the last bus to our town. So I was sleeping on the floor in a home of some people I really didn't know, but who were being hospitable for me because I'd missed the last bus. And I was sleeping on the floor in their house when we heard on the radio that President Kennedy had been shot. And at first I thought that it might be President Kennedy's father had died, because his father had been ill a couple of times. And so we all listened to the radio some more, and sure enough, Kennedy had been killed. And everybody was very excited, and the people with whom I was staying were all sure that we would be unable to go back to the United States, and they immediately were offering us to stay there in the Philippines. Everybody was willing to have us move in with them or stay, because they called it President Kennedy's Peace Corps there. And they were all sure we wouldn't be safe going back. And other people gave us advice like, if you do go back and they're shooting at you, you run in a zigzag. It makes you much harder to hit, which is, I think, true. But, and the priest from the nearest church there came rushing over. He heard it on his radio, and he knew that these people had an American staying at their house. And he came rushing over, and his English was a little rusty, and he said, "Congratulations on the death of your president." But I knew what he meant. And I caught the bus out to our town, and yes, come in here. I caught the bus back to our town, and when I got back to our town, the most poignant thing was that my school, where I spent much of my time, was on the way into the main town. I was getting off the bus there, and they were all waiting for me to get back, because the Boy Scouts were going to take their school flag down to half-mast, but they wanted me to be there for it. And so they were all assembled. The color guard was all assembled. They knew what bus I was going to be on, waiting for me to get off the bus so they could take the flag down to half-mast in my presence for that.
My name is Brenda Brown Schoonover. As a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines, I was Brenda Brown. I was in Group 1, the first group in the Philippines, and among the charter members of the Peace Corps, among the first group, and I was there from 1961 to 63. I lived in Magarao, Camarines Sur, which is near Naga City, on the island of Luzon. I think I learned so much from the Filipinos in general about being patient, about being understanding. I learned certainly to be a better listener, because their society was so gentle. There were times when they were, I would say, almost too gentle, in terms of they always wanted to let us know or make us believe that they agreed with what was going on. And after a few incidents where you learn later on that they weren't agreeing with the project you were trying to pursue, you had to learn to be a better listener without being too aggressive in your approach to them.
I'm Marianne Gould, and I was in the Philippines 1961 to 63.
Dean Wiley. I was in the Philippines 1 group from 1961 to 63. I was stationed for 1 year in Masbate, the provincial capital, and for another year in Legazpi, Albay, in the Bicol region. I taught journalism and English in high school. And my wife and I had a radio program for our second year called The Active Voice, aimed at school teachers in the Bicol region. And we came back in 1963 to Washington, and I worked for 2 years for the Peace Corps as the first former volunteer to edit the Peace Corps newsletter here in Washington.
My name is Phyllis Baer. I was Phyllis Smith. I was in Peace Corps, one of the first volunteers to go over. I was 61, 62, Philippines. I was stationed in Guimbal, Iloilo. on Panay, island of Panay. I did work in the school system. However, my greatest time was spent in the summer in northern Luzon with the Ifugao tribes, where I had a phenomenal experience. I worked in northern Luzon. We set up a small healthcare facility in northern Luzon with the leftovers of Tom Dooley, who had expired when he was in Vietnam. And we had all his medical supplies and whatnot, and we set up a small clinic. I subsequently came back to the United States and went into medicine, and I'm a physician now. And I thank my experience to the Peace Corps. It was phenomenal.